Hi, everyone. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with
Mr. Michael del Castillo.
Mr. Michael del Castillo, talking about illicit activities, although they're legal activities.
They are, yeah. It's kind of a fun story. It's legal money laundering, though. Shortly after we published that headline, 1,000 people on Twitter said it wasn't legal. So we'll see.
Only in Germany.
Only in Germany.
Walk us through this story a bit.
Yeah, so it was a really fun story. I was interviewing this bank, a tiny bank, $40 million assets under management, that had scored a pretty cool contract with a state government in Germany. Germany is set up very similar to the U.S. and that they're a federal system, so there's different states and each has their own governments. And one of those states, Hesse, signed a deal with this bank to basically help them reverse launder dirty money. And so the way that happens is these special agents, armed police officers, will break down somebody's door doing what they believe is criminal activity, using Bitcoin to accept payment, maybe launder their money, whatever the case might be. And they literally seize the private keys that gives them access to this Bitcoin. And there's a lot of ways that they can actually do that. But the important part is that it happens, right? So the money moves from the criminal's hands into the government's hands. And there's
no victims, right? There's nobody to compensate or make whole to say, you know,
the victims, I think I'm kind of an advocate of the idea that there's no such thing as a victimless crime, but these are like tertiary and quaternary victims, like very difficult, if impossible, to identify. Like, so for example, if somebody spends $500 to buy methamphetamine from a guy in Arizona, and you seize that $500, who are you going to give it to?
That's true.
Right?
Yep.
And so this isn't necessarily stolen money. This is money that was done for illegal ends.
Earned through illegal activity.
Yeah.
So they put it in the bank, and is it the property of the German government, basically?
So
it's now money, they say?
It's not actually in the bank right away. It starts off in possession of the German government. One of the many interesting things about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies is you don't actually need a bank to hold it. And so the German government is just doing what we would call self-custody. They are storing these assets on their own. In the United States, when the U.S. Marshals does something similar, which they have done to the tune of 185,000 Bitcoin that has been seized by the U.S. government, they sell it on auction, just like you would a Lamborghini, a Ferrari, a house, any ill-gotten good that the government comes to own. Germany thought that was kind of preposterous because these assets are valued on a market.
Right.
So you don't need to figure out how much the one-of-a-kind 1952 Ferrari is because the Bitcoin markets are established.
Yeah, the market will tell you.
Yeah. So they wanted to sell their assets into a market. But the problem was they had how do I put this? There's a hodgepodge network of private companies whose one of their main jobs is to manage blacklists of cryptocurrency that they believe has been that is associated with criminal activity or maybe sanctioned activity. You know.
So now the government finds themselves on the wrong side. Of the blacklisters.
Yes, perfect way to put it. So the government has all this money. In the case that I was writing about for the story, 100 million euros worth of cryptocurrency. So a lot of crypto, right? But it's all been marked as criminal. It's this informal network of private companies without any regulator or middleman to sort of organize them, all has their own blacklist, and they've all marked it as ill-begotten gains.
If they had decided to do what they do in the States, which is auction it off, wouldn't they have encountered the same challenge from this group of folks?
It's a really good question. I've actually been trying to get a little bit of clarity from the U.S. Marshals Service about what exactly they do. They haven't actually sold Bitcoin at auction in a while, and it's very likely that process has changed. In fact, I did just come underneath possession of a report about this, which I haven't gotten into yet. But yeah, the short answer is that yes. The longer answer is we're not 100% sure exactly how the U.S. government cleans its own seized goods. But so the German government identified this bank in Germany that had
formerly tiny bank.
Formerly tiny, still tiny.
But
yeah.
It's a lot of money.
They're not, interestingly, they don't actually charge for this service. They're buying the assets at a discount from the government and then selling them after they've had them changed from blacklist to whitelist at market price. So then they keep the difference.
It's more like an arbitrage than a profit center.
Exactly. And it also helps the government from like having to deal directly with exchanges, which they don't want to do because it doesn't look good.
Yeah.
So it was actually a really nice setup to the tune of $100 million on the one deal, but they've done a total of 150 million euros, through this reverse money laundering process. Now, the day I was getting ready to publish this story, we got word that an exchange that had done $3 billion worth of illegal and illicit transactions for North Korea, for the Russian military, and for dozens of other criminal and illicit organizations had been shut down by the German government. I was frantically reading through the fine print there, and sure enough, it was my company. Yeah.
So it was one bank in one state. It sounds like a rogue bank. Is that fair to say, as opposed to like, hey, it's perfectly legal?
No. So they've now signed. Germany has 16 states, I believe.
Right.
They've now signed contracts with 3 of those states. And I actually think that the rogue thing here is that Germany's regulations have given their financial institutions such clarity to engage in this kind of business.
So why was it shut down if what it was doing was perfectly okay?
Oh, no. We had a misunderstanding.
Ah, okay. Mea culpa.
No.
Should we redo that or just like keep it natural, right? It's we're among friends.
We'll let the producers figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. Which one of us gets to look stupid this week? Probably me.
The bank did not get in trouble. What happened was the same German government organization had seized another organization's assets.
This is like the FBI, or
it's the federal police. The federal police are the armed special agents that actually kick these doors down or surreptitiously gain access to servers, that sort of a thing. It's basically like the German private police.
Well, I mean, what interests me about this is my familiarity with this whole realm, I'd say, is HSBC, money laundering about 10 years ago. They were slapped with, I don't remember if it was like a 1.5 billion. I don't even know. It was a huge fine. But in essence, all these banks are really scared about handling cash and, go to great lengths because you can lose your license. You can get hit with it. So is blockchain fundamentally and cryptocurrencies fundamentally different? Or is it just this one state basically saw an opportunity, or the German government saw an opportunity? I think
so. The differences aren't actually as big as it would seem. What I like to compare it to is imagine an old-fashioned bank, old-fashioned paper money, and an old-fashioned robber with a cowboy hat on and a bandana and some guns in their holsters, right? And they go and they throw a leather bag down on the cashier's desk there, and the cashier throws a whole bunch of money in there and a paint bomb. And the paint bomb is timed so that it's going to go off 5 or 10 minutes after the robber leaves. And when that paint bomb goes off, all of that money gets marked as being participated in a robbery.
Right.
And so if you want to try and spend that money, old-fashioned dollar bills, old-fashioned euros, you're going to have to go through a similar cleaning process.
Yeah.
And whether or not it's a government or a bank that comes back into possession of the stolen goods or the robber themselves, they are essentially going to have to remove that money from a de facto blacklist that was created when that paint bomb went off.
Yeah.
And so the only thing that's different is the technology. The only thing that's different is the source of trust that gives that money value in the first place. So with a US dollar, it's obviously the Federal Reserve and the US government. With the euro, it's the European Union and the European Central Bank. And with Bitcoin, it's mathematics and electricity.
So the genesis of Bitcoin, I think of Silk Road, and basically it was kind of a Wild West. Hey,
Yes.
If you want to do something illicit, use this currency. It obviously changed a lot. Are we seeing more criminal activity in the space, or is it just simply that when it takes place, we know the bank to go to?
It's a little bit of both. First of all, last year was a record year for cryptocurrency illegal activity. It was a whopping 0.24%. It was a tiny amount, but it was a record. It was the highest percentage of total cryptocurrency transaction per illegal cryptocurrency transaction on record. And that 0.24% was $20 billion. So you have to imagine, like, you can do a lot of damage with $20 billion.
Yeah.
So, like, it shouldn't be, shirked off as, inconsequential illegal activity. Like $20 billion worth of illegal activity, even if there's, $1 trillion worth of volume, can still do a lot of harm. But I think that what's different is that the process by which these seized goods are returning to the market is getting refined. It's maturing. And that's going to be essential eventually, because Bitcoin has a cap. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin in existence. And that doesn't count the Bitcoin that's been lost, the Bitcoin that's on a blacklist that can't be spent. And so you have to imagine, if these processes don't mature, if there doesn't become a way by which governments can return seized assets into the market.
So Germany's more a role model than a cautionary tale.
If you're looking at cryptocurrency adoption as a good thing, Germany is a role model. If you think of Bitcoin as another investment class, an opportunity to diversify, maybe to hedge, and you want to see a way for illicit assets to be returned to circulation in a clean way, Germany is a role model. If you think Bitcoin is dangerous, if you want to see Bitcoin off the market, if you want to see Bitcoin out of banks, quite frankly, keeping the seized goods behind a locked box and never returning them to market is a great way to go about doing that.
Is it mostly, I mean, there's Bitcoin, Ethereum. I mean, at one point, I know there were like 1,800 plus cryptocurrencies. Maybe those days are done, but are we seeing an array of different cryptocurrencies that are going through this process?
Yes, definitely. The vast majority of the seized assets are Bitcoin. But there's a lot of stable coins, which are basically tokens issued on a blockchain that are matched one-to-one with a more stable asset like a dollar. So that's more like the crypto equivalent of having actual dollars on hand. And there's some lesser known cryptocurrencies as well, particularly stuff that's popular amongst criminals. There are cryptocurrencies that do a much better job obscuring the tracks of the owners. And those currencies are pretty commonly seized as well. I think it is interesting that while these privacy-enhancing, privacy-protecting cryptocurrencies that are very popular among criminals are still seizable.
Can I ask about the fallout, sort of going, like, help us see around the corner? We've had this period of incredible disruption in the cryptocurrency space. Now we're seeing, you've got all of these, you always find wonderful stories of vignettes in terms of how to think about it. Are we, like, net, are we seeing a wider acceptance? Because it seemed like when FTX happened that it put a halt for a lot of banks saying, see, I told you so, or let's just, pause on that. are we now seeing activity start up again because, it's the world didn't end?
Not necessarily start up again. But I think what's interesting is that the European financial jurisdiction is completely different than in the United States. And the
more friendly or less?
More friendly.
Yeah.
No, I shouldn't say more friendly, more clear. So I think that like the bank that I was interviewing, Bankhaus Scheich is, sorry, my bad pronunciation there. Bankhaus Scheich, they are very confident that what they have done is compliant with existing regulations.
Yeah.
And who's to say whether or not there might be banks in the States that would love to get into this same business, but are terrified because the United States is imposing 90-year-old regulations on them that far predate anything like a blockchain or cryptocurrency. So it's not that like there's a chronology where there was all of this fallout around the collapses of centralized companies that were dealing with crypto and quite frankly mismanaging their investments. And then all of a sudden now we've got like a new generation. This was all happening at the same time, just on the opposite side of the world or on the opposite side of the Atlantic Ocean.
While I have you, I want to ask about the other story I saw in the past week, if you don't mind. I mean, we'll call this chapter 2, but Alexis Ohanian.
Yes.
One of my favorite people in this space because he always has lots to say. Talk about a little bit about what he's doing because he has been somebody that people look to as.
Alexis was a really fun profile that I did a week or two ago, and I try not to go into my reporting with preconceived ideas of what the story's going to be. So I had an opportunity to sit down for an extended conversation with Alexis. I went to his farm around the corner from where he and
I think farm
Serena
man
Williams
cave is
live.
the term, right? Yeah.
The farm man cave is more accurate.
Yeah.
And we kind of sat down with very little
like, what up?
Yeah. We were just hanging out a bit. I obviously had done my research. I knew about his investment portfolio. But I was really interested that when I asked him like how he got to where he is so that he was able to make one of the very first investments in Coinbase, which ended up being a great investment, how he got to the point where he was able to buy at Ethereum's pre-sale, making him one of the very few people that got in at that very, 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 very early stage. His answer to that question kind of surprised me. He literally gestured to the floor around him at these gorgeous Armenian rugs that were underneath his desk. And these rugs had been recently purchased. His family's inheritance, which
he's from Armenia.
His family is Armenian. And Armenian families have a tradition of handing down rugs for generations, centuries. And his inheritance had been seized during what we now call the Armenian genocide. And several of his family members were killed. His grandfather narrowly avoided being murdered by soldiers who had just decapitated his father. And his aunt sat him down when he was 6 years old and told him this story. And it resonated with him, the value of assets that can't be seized, the value of being able to own something that doesn't rely on an institution that can be controlled by a potentially corrupt government. And in 2014, 2015, 2016, when the Coinbases of the world were starting to get traction, when some of the very first investments were being made, he was there, and it really stuck with him, going back to what we were talking about with how the German government could actually hold these assets without needing a bank. That's the same for all of these digital assets. They can all be held without a bank. And so it was actually the difficulty to seize these assets that really stood out to Alexis and led to him being one of the very first investors in the space. Now, it's an important caveat to make that these assets are only seizure resistant if you are managing your own keys, if you are holding your own private keys. If you are relying on an exchange, if you are relying on a bank, if you are relying on some other middleman that can help you find your password when you forget it, they have your private keys and they can be compelled to hand over assets just like any other organization underneath the power of a government. In fact, while I was researching that story, I found a lawyer in Florida who 2 years prior had 0 cryptocurrency seizure cases. And a year later, 20% of her clientele were cryptocurrency seizures. Most of those were civil, which means that the government was able to take them and keep them without a trial. And unless you decide and or have the resources to fight it, they just have your assets. And so this particular lawyer out in Florida really sees government, particularly civilian seizures of cryptocurrency, as something that untowardly affects the poorer investors.
Well, it's ironic because the genesis of the currency is to get around government and central banks and,
I think people are learning that lesson big time right now. And to go back to your other points about the domino effect of failures in the traditional banking world, and we'll throw out some crypto companies as well. You mentioned FTX, but BlockFi, Celsius, a number of others have all imploded. Those are failures of central management. Those are failures of chief executives, managing directors. Those are failures of what we call traditional centralized finance. And the same kinds of bad investment decisions that were made at FTX are being made at banks around the world, and vice versa. What we're seeing as these collapses are happening, first of all, very interestingly, the price of Bitcoin is going up. Bitcoin's gone up something like 38% in the last week and a half. It's gone up, I think, 68% this year. It is by far the best performing asset of the year. And that is as everything else is going down, as banks are closing, as centralized cryptocurrency exchanges are going bankrupt. And we've seen some evidence, though, it's very early, and I don't think you want to overstate this, that one of the lessons that is being learned is self-custody. People are learning that they're not trusting these institutions.
Until they come to your door, and then it's like handed over, right?
It's a very good point. I always joke with people, but there's some truth to it. I like being able to call somebody up when I forget my password. God knows I'm going to forget it. And I like having somebody that I can call and ask that question. Now, the risk is that I have to trust those people that they're handling my savings responsibly.
Just don't use it to sell meth, and you'll probably be okay. I think that's the lesson
or
in all this.
Or have more than $250,000, at which point the FDIC insurance isn't supposed to help you out.
No, but we now believe it will. So
there might be an infinite
ceiling. Thank you, Silicon Valley Bank, for that. Good to talk with you.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
Thanks.